Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a senior professional and a coach from the US, Mr. Vladimir Baranov. Vladimir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh, for having me.
Thank you. Vladimir is a tech founder and a leader coach, an executive coach for founders and technical leaders. He's a serial entrepreneur as well. So, Vladimir, my first question to you: you have founded and exited companies in fintech and space tech. What early experiences shaped the way you approach entrepreneurship today?
That's a good question. I think curiosity, asking why, trying to figure out what's behind the curtain and how things worked,
Mhm.
helped change my mindset and propel me into the world of entrepreneurship.
Mm.
Was I a great entrepreneur? I wouldn't say so.
Mm.
It's always in the hindsight that you get to learn your lessons,
Yeah.
and this is what I try to pass on through my coaching now.
Mm.
But I'd say those attributes were probably instrumental to me becoming an entrepreneur.
Amazing. You've also spoken about personal growth shaping your perspective. What were some of the most significant inner battles you had to overcome during your entrepreneurial journey?
Ah, you really go with the deep questions right away. So all right, let's go through those. Um, I'd say it's a lot of deprogramming and removing of myths. So a couple things that I had to unlearn was one is that progress is linear in a
Mhm.
sense. If you define the problem and work at it really hard, eventually you get result. And based on those merits, the world rewards you, which what the success is in your mind or what
Mhm.
the public sources of information give to you. But I had to unlearn that, and that path to anywhere is completely unlinear, and definition of success for everybody is different. So in a sense, you have to find out what is important for you and how can you make a path to there. And it's always going to be a path that will be only visible, let's say 5-10% into the future, and beyond that it's unknown because it really comes with a time perspective and a context. Once you reach that juncture, then you'll get another 5-10% visibility to the goal that you're trying to reach. And
Mhm.
then even when you're within the reach of the goal, you will realize that's not the goal that you're looking for, and you need to redefine what it is. So I'd say that's one of the things that I had to unlearn.
Mhm.
Another thing that I had to unlearn is that you can do everything yourself. And while a lot of entrepreneurs are very smart individuals who venture on this path of exciting business building,
Mhm.
they have a belief that, hey, the only person who can do this is me, and I am the best person to execute all those things, and I can figure them out all out. And at some point, including myself, there is a point where you hit a capacity or resource restriction where if you're giving enough time, you can climb 1,000 learning curves at the same, eventually, and get, succeeding in climbing them. But given the short timeline, you have to delegate. You have to bring in other people. You have to trust others. You have to bring the team if you want to actually get anything off the ground within a short period
Mhm.
of time. So I'd
Mhm.
say those two were quite effectively um, I don't want to say doctrines, maybe the philosophies were essential for me to becoming a better entrepreneur.
Great response. Thank you. Uh, let's now talk about your role as a tech founder and a leader coach. Um, and in this area, my first question for you is that you guide founders through 0 to 1 journeys.
Mhm.
What are the most common misconceptions founders have at the idea stage?
So great question, and I think it's where the idea itself is important.
Hmm.
There's so much attachment with the founders and entrepreneurs that the idea that they have created, that they founded, that it's essentially theirs, that their ego is part of that, their identity is part of that idea. But they have to divorce it because, in a sense, idea is really an experiment of need feed with the market. So if the market has a need, idea is just I guess, of how that need would be fulfilled. And with progress, with more you find out about the market, the more you have to pivot and adjust that idea or create additional guesses that would eventually create the product market fit that will get you some of that needed traction.
Hmm. And is there an example you can give me without any names, of course, to help my viewers and listeners to understand the point?
Yes. So let's say probably some of your viewers will be familiar with this device called AI Pin.
Yeah.
It's in the recent years it came out. It's been a little gadget that you put on your chest and it
Mhm.
listens, and it has this tiny little projector which projects things on your hand. I thought it was pretty nifty from technical
Mhm.
perspective. But some things that they haven't done is that they haven't actually done user, I guess, research, or they haven't done interviews with the market because they have sold nothing. And if you have sold nothing, that implies that there was no product market fit, and everything that was coming out, it was
Yeah.
coming out of their minds
Yeah.
into just the product, and they raised a lot of money.
Mm.
Um, Another similar thing is Apple Newton in the early
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
It came out. It was a precursor to a lot of smartphones. It was a very, very, very smart device. Very awesome. But unfortunately, it was too early
Yeah.
for its debut because nobody was ready. I'm sure they did some kind of market research, but probably not enough because the users looked at the devices like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I don't
Mm.
know where to plug it in. I don't know what the network. I don't know like what the infrastructure is. But I'll give you also the inverse of that.
Mm.
So there is a product called Crocs, which I'm sure familiar.
Yeah.
Maybe you own
Yeah.
a pair of Crocs too.
Mhm.
I thought they were the ugliest ever footwear ever brought to the
Right.
market. So
Right.
in a sense, like we sometimes use our own intuition worth something will click or not click with the market, and I was not the only one.
Mm.
There was a movie in the early 2000s called Idiocracy, and the
Mm.
director there was thinking, what kind of shoes people who are idiots in the future will wear? Everybody in the movie wears Crocs.
Wow.
But guess what? Our opinions are irrelevant. Market says, "Oh my God, give me more."
I know.
And and even on top of that, what do we have with Crocs? We have those little plugins which goes into the holes of Crocs, and those
Correct.
businesses are also making millions.
I know.
How do you even know that ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, what I think I'm trying to introduce here, the concept that market is kind of a great unknown. And in a
Mm.
sense, like you have to probe it with the questions, probe
Mm.
it with different other inquiry instruments so you can understand exactly what they're looking for. It has nothing to do with your idea. And you're
Correct.
just guessing what they want. And eventually you need to pivot to the place where you get some traction.
Absolutely. What a great response. Thank you. My next question is, what do you see as the biggest blind spot technical founders face when they first take on leadership responsibilities?
So I'd say the models that we maintain in our heads, and I'm saying we because I was a technical founder,
Mm.
of what leadership responsibilities entail.
Mm.
And we build those models based on our prior experiences, right? So, in a sense, many technical leaders were exposed to non technical leaders leading their efforts,
Mm.
which implied that the job of the leaders is checking things off on the list.
Mm. Mm.
And when they move into leadership position, they think that's what it is. You check
Mm.
things off the list, you bark orders, and things get done.
Mm.
And while they are maintaining that framework of operation, they will likely to fail. One is because that mode of operation does not really work. And
Mm.
number two, they will start discovering there are so many different things that they have not seen from the seat of where they were operating before. Now to a leadership, when they're in a leadership position, some things become more aware.
Mm.
What I like to bring up when I promote or if I coach somebody to be about to promote, I like to
Mm.
bring up this analogy. So when we're individual contributors as technologists, we interact with the computers. But when we become leaders, now we have to interact with the humans who interact with the computers. And it
Yeah.
becomes a non-linear, very individualized relationship between everybody who reports to you.
Yeah.
And you have to build out that interface individually and thoroughly as
Mm.
if you're learning a new API protocol.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes that analogy lands much better than using some more abstract leadership language that's more familiar to the business
Mm.
folks.
Mm. And therefore, a follow-up question for you, Vladimir, is what is one leadership behavior you wish more first-time founders would adopt early?
Um, it's a two-pronged. So number one, listening, and number two, asking really good open-ended
Mm,
questions.
mm,
A lot of founders have this idea that if you have a vision and you stick by it and you completely committed to it and you believe in it, eventually things will appear and you um, manifest these things in existence. And yes, for very, 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 very small percentage of individuals, just because of probabilities, it will happen.
mm,
But for others, it involves a lot of interaction with the markets, with the teams, with the partners, with the family, where you have to receive that feedback because you only have one pair of eyes. But when you're listening, other pairs of eyes provide you so much valuable feedback
yeah.
that you can listen to and either incorporate it or pass it on, but at least hear it. You're
Mm,
not always right. This is the one thing that you always have to step over
yeah.
because being right is only being right in a specific context.
Mm,
All these other people around you have very different contexts, which just you sometimes cannot look from, and they are providing you very valuable information.
mm,
And the second part about asking the questions, once they provide you that information, it's very important not to shut that flow down. It's to learn how to expand the flow of information that is coming from them through open-ended questions.
mm,
Instead of asking yes or no question, ask a question, why do you think that way?
right.
What is your reasoning based on? What
Mm,
did you see that made you change your mind?
mm,
Because that way you'll get so much more information in, and then you can decide whether or not you want to filter out before
mm.
shutting it off ahead of time.
Very well said. You've seen startups at every stage from an incubator to an exit. What is the most predictable point at which things start to break?
One is misconception of whether you're building a technology or you're building a business.
Hmm.
Technologists are very much, again, going back to married to their own idea, and there is a bit of a perfection paralysis and
Hmm.
premature optimization where you want to release something to the market that is absolutely working 100%. And if you see that, and if you don't see enough interactions or input from the market, it will reach a precipice where you realize that you have invested so much money, but you've got no traction out of it whatsoever,
Hmm.
and that will break the system.
Yeah.
Another one is communication. So at some point, you will head into the business, let's say two, three people going together, and they start building something.
Hmm.
But over time, if you haven't perfected or haven't learned ways of better communicating between each other, you will not have that essential link that will align you going forward when interacting with other parties and building something together. It's
Hmm.
like three horses that will be pulling the cart into three different directions. So I
Hmm.
would say two things. One, misalignment between technology and the market, and number two is communication between the
Hmm.
founders.
Hmm. Well said. Well said. And what early signals tell you that a startup is about to outgrow its processes or team structure?
That's a good question. I'd say how busy the founders are
Hmm.
and how often the decisions have to go back to the executive level before moving on.
Hmm.
I would say number of bottlenecks that exists in the organization from communication and decision making perspective would be the indicator that this startup will need to introduce new processes in order to scale better.
Hmm. Well said. Next few questions are for you, Vladimir. Your clients describe you as emotionally intelligent and practical. How do you teach emotional intelligence to analytical or engineering driven founders?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, while emotions are qualitative, I
Yeah.
believe that they can also be quantified, but not in the pure numbers,
Mm,
but against a particular a scale, against a spectrum, against a benchmark, against a comparison.
mm,
And while the emotions are felt purely in our heads, we can still build up a model. I
mhm.
am feeling angry. Am I feeling angry at zero? Am I
Yeah.
feeling angry at 10?
Mm,
Or what is the other person feeling? And do you think we can take a guess? Also, can you verify their emotion by asking, like, what is the emotion that you're experiencing? So this way, you're syncing the models of your own self from emotional perspective and logical perspective with
Mm,
the other person's model. So
mm,
this way, once you have those two models of the people, yours and theirs, you
mm,
can create links through sentence and questions, and you can adjust your language accordingly. So then your information is more likely to be absorbed by the other person because it doesn't have the barrier of emotion blocking it. Their attention span and their bandwidth is properly aligned uh, to your message. So this way, I'm kind of bringing a lot of technical
yeah,
language in to
yeah.
understand. Let's say if somebody is angry, their
Mm,
bandwidth to listen to you is very low. So in a sense, you have to address the angry issue to increase that bandwidth, to increase that attention span, so you can load a new message, which is either very dense, complex, or a simple message.
mm,
And we can speak in a kind of like in analogies of communication channels to address some of those understandings of emotional intelligence.
very well said. The other challenge that I've often seen with technical leaders is how do they bridge the gap between engineering precision and business urgency?
Absolutely. That is a
How
great
how
question.
do you help them handle this big dilemma that most technical founders face?
Yes. So I might say something heretical, but I don't think there is such a thing as engineering precision.
Hmm.
I think engineering precision only exists in textbooks,
Okay.
um, or in places where you have an unlimited amount of funding, like in a government research facility. But even there, at the last moment of precision, you still end up with so many different options to pursue things. In the end, you still have to make a call which of those options is just better suited and not necessarily perfect because your models, especially if you're developing something new, have not been yet established to be so precise.
Mm,
Now, you mentioned business impatience, but what I probably would reward that relationship into is that in order for the business to succeed, those two parties have to be in alignment that we're not doing something quick and we're not doing something precise, but we're trying to make the most optimal experiment that tests the need of the market and generates the necessary amount of traction for us to come back. And that's the definition of a problem. Not the thing that has to be perfect, not that the thing has to be quick, but it's a unit of an experiment that both parties are optimizing for the highest throughput of traction.
mm,
And once those incentives are aligned, then the engineers can decide on their own how much precision it has to be, and then the business people can decide
right.
how frequently do you want to test the market and how thorough the experiment they want to have.
Mm, very well said. How do you help founders navigate the shift from doing everything themselves to delegating effectively?
Right. So, great question. And I will refer to the earlier analogy that I wanted to say.
Mm,
One is to understand that the pride that comes with doing everything yourself
yeah,
is absolutely valid.
correct.
Every single founder, most of the founders that I talk to, they can learn everything. To the one who can learn accounting, can learn HR, can they learn contract? Absolutely. But how many of those things can you learn at the same time? If
Correct.
you're climbing 20, 30, 60 different learning curves at the same time, do you think you'll be efficient? And we only have so many hours in a week. So, in a sense, can you really read 50 different physics textbooks?
Yeah.
There is a limit to everybody's learning, no matter how overgenerous you are. So, in a sense, at some point, you realize that you have to pick the number of learning curves that you yourself climbing and
Mm,
perhaps pay others to climb the learning curves for you, or you pay for somebody who has already climbed those learning curves in order to borrow on their expertise. Now,
mm,
we'll extend your question a little bit because how do you know when somebody has expertise,
mm,
especially if you're not yourself educated in it? And
correct.
it is a difficult question.
Yeah.
It's really difficult for a very smart doctor to hire a lawyer, or vice
Mm,
versa, for a lawyer to find a really smart doctor.
mm,
And there are a couple ways. One is you transfer learn to a relationship that you already know. So, like basically referrals. So, if you have somebody who you trust, who already worked with somebody, you use their referral. But
mm,
number two, most of the time we don't really have that referral available. So, how can you do that? Well, you benchmark them against each other. You
mm,
try to hire those experts in groups of three if you can afford it, and you ask them to do exactly the same task. Yes, it will be a little bit money burned, but at least it will show you what the market is capable of, and you can compare their outputs against each other and thus go through with the one which produces the better result.
Amazing. Time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
You're also a coach. And therefore, my question is, can you share a moment when a coaching conversation dramatically changed a founder's trajectory?
Ooh, um, kind of going through multiple thoughts here. I'd say, okay, so this one founder comes into mind, and it has to do with the themes that we have been talking about before,
Mm,
where they've been so focused on building their product. And when I would ask, who are you building it for? They would say this particular users
mm,
and tell me about this users for blah, blah, blah. But have you spoken to any of those users? Have you asked them any of those questions?
mm.
And they took a step back, like, oh, no, I've been kind of building in a closet kind of
Yeah.
thing. I want to make it perfect. And then the light bulb went off, like,
Mm,
oh, I got to do that.
yeah.
And they went ahead and they talked to them and they realized there was actually no business and they
Mm,
stopped that effort. Um, and another one comes in, which is more about between founders' relationships. A
mm,
burned out founder we had a conversation with. He came over and he said, "I'm done. I just want to quit cold turkey, and I'm going to tell my co-founder tomorrow." And I asked him, "Well, if your co-founder was in your position, how would they proceed with this situation? Would it feel good if you would leave cold turkey?" And they sat in silence for like 2 minutes. Like, no, you're right, Vladimir.
mm,
This is not how I want to approach it.
mm,
So I would ask them, how would you do that? And they came up with the answer, which was pretty reasonable, that I will talk to them, I will give them leeway, I will have a space which will create that vulnerability for us to part on amicable terms.
correct.
And I just want to highlight something. While I did say something that sounds like I was giving advice, most of the time during my conversations, my responsibility is to ask questions,
Mm,
just kind of presenting the problem from different angle so
mm,
that the client can themselves analyze it. Because in coaching, if you do give direct answers,
correct.
most of the time they're not being absorbed or they're not being listened to, not because the advice is not good, because it comes out of the context.
Correct.
And coaching responsibilities to guide the person through their own context, the path to the answer which they will find
Mm,
useful.
well said. And my last question for you, Vladimir. A lot of technical founders would love to be able to say that now we are in a general management role. What advice do you give technical leaders who want to grow into broader C-suite roles without losing their technical edge?
Mm, mm. So I'd say one, they will have to define what that technical edge is. Does it mean that they code on a
Yeah.
regular basis? Does it mean that they review architectural diagrams?
Mm,
Does it mean that they make high level technical decisions? Does it mean that they go to CES conference every year, or they go to Red Hat, to the Black Hat conference for cybersecurity? What does that mean, right? And number two, any of those efforts, do they accelerate the company's efforts? Do they roadblock the company's efforts? Do they bottleneck them? So, what's the best optimization there while you can satisfy your own needs, but also the company gets those?
mm,
Number two, so the second one was like the first part was about maintaining technical savvy. Number two is about how to grow into more broader roles in an executive role,
mhm.
is learning what other people do. Like, what are their models of the universe? How do they
Yeah.
think about the world? What are their priorities? And what are their expectations of the technical person who
Mm,
is in the room?
mm,
And the goal here is to become what is called a T-shaped person, because it's more like when you have one vertical, which is your
yeah.
technology knowledge, and you know it very deep. Now you start expanding at the top, and you start to learn marketing and legal and
Yeah.
HR and accounting and finance, all those important parts of the business that are necessary to be run. And when you understand other people's model of the universe, and when you can speak their language, they're more likely to be looking to you up to as a leader, and perhaps maybe as a leader of the whole company and not just the technology function.
Mm, amazing. And on that note, Vladimir, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this one has been with you. We covered some very fascinating grounds on founders, some of the challenges they face, and how you help uh, founders, technical founders, handle a lot of the headaches and challenges most of us do face. I just love the way you told me that founders can learn everything, but they need to pick the number of learning curves they want to have. And that is such a powerful observation because most of us tend to believe that we can do everything. And yet, when we start to do everything, we start to mess up everything as well. Thank you for covering a lot of ground on different aspects, which I think is going to be a lot of value to my viewers and listeners. Thank you again for speaking to me and good luck to you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ashutosh, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.